Namanda, namanda. Okay, hello everyone. This week I'd like to take up again this question of Buddhist values. Talked about it a couple of weeks ago. It's a huge topic, and there's so many levels to it, but it's something that I want to kind of delve into a little bit more. The word values, right? It's like, what does it mean? And I don't want to get too much into that because I haven't really done any research on that or anything, but it seems like attitudes we value maybe, right? Or, it's kind of like morals. What should I do? What shouldn't I do? But it seems to be a little bit different. It's more like attitudes that we hold maybe. And so I was thinking, too, that there might be what we might consider positive and negative values. And, from some of my articles, I think last year, looking at positive and negative and neutral, and that we don't want to hold on to those too much. But here I'm thinking negative values would be what not to do or what's bad. Right? And so in Buddhism, we have, for example, the 108 kleshas or bonno or passions or defilements, right? That number 108 we're familiar with, I think, from ringing the bell. And I talk about it then. But more basically, the three poisons, right? I think is a good place to start for this kind of negative values, maybe we could call it, right? They're poisons. In a way, it's interesting, right? They're not sins necessarily. They're viewed more as poisons, harmful, right? Harmful to others, but also harmful to oneself. And so the three poisons are greed, anger, and ignorance is the way I like to refer to them. Sometimes greed is known as desire. Sometimes anger could also be known as hatred or aversion. Ignorance as like delusion is another way to think of it. But today, let's think about I only want to really take up greed and anger for the time being, right? And greed or desire, right? Desire is a good way to think about it. Attachment is another, right? So it's not just one thing. That's one thing I like about these. They're related, obviously. But greed, we seem more attached to like material objects or money, right? Desire is wanting something or someone, and could have kind of a sexual aspect to it, but doesn't have to. Attachment seems like kind of a more neutral word, right? Which might be good, but that might also detract from the more kind of intense desire or greed, right? So that this idea of greed or desire or attachment is one of the poisons, and the other one thinking about is anger. Anger, we think about being angry, but could also be hatred, right? Really hating someone or something. And here again, you could really hate mushrooms, right? It seems kind of funny, but no, some people really hate things like that, right? And so it could be that kind of thing, but it could also be racism, racial hatred could be on here, right? Hatred can bring about anger. Right? If you're really like you hate the opposing team and you hate them so much, someone can tease you and get you so angry that you start fighting or something, right? And then aversion is another way to think of it. So aversion is a term that I kind of the opposite of attachment maybe, right? Attachment is like, oh, I want that, I need it, I can't let it go. Aversion is like, oh, get it away from me. So those two are viewed as harmful states of mind, harmful ways to be, harmful activities. And so then, if you don't want to do greed, if you don't want to do anger, what's the opposite? What's the antidote? And one kind of interesting way that Buddhism states these things sometimes is to say, well, instead of having greed, have the absence of greed, right? Instead of having greed, don't have greed. Instead of having anger, have the absence of anger. That's one, I think, kind of classic Buddhist way to put it, right? That it doesn't necessarily offer an opposing attitude, right? It's more get rid of that attitude. Don't have anger anymore. So instead of, it doesn't say necessarily, right? Another way to think of it, the opposite of anger maybe is love. right? And this way of thinking about it doesn't do that, right? So instead of necessarily having an opposite attitude, instead it says get rid of this attitude, get rid of desire, let go of desire, right? Get rid of anger, let go of hatred. But I do also think that we can also see more positive attitudes suggested. And so I was thinking of two of the classics, kindness and compassion. Right? Kindness or friendliness, right? And then compassion. So these, you might have heard me talk about them as part of a set of four, the four immeasurable minds. Those are kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And maybe I'll talk about those four sometime later. But here, let's focus on kindness and compassion. They're really interesting. In that larger expanded kind of version, we learn that kindness is Maitri, related to Maitreya, the future Buddha. But this Maitri or Metta, so we have the Metta meditation we do, recitation we do sometimes, right? Metta or Maitri is this kindness, friendliness, loving kindness is the way some Buddhist groups translate this. And then compassion or Karuna is this other even bigger kind of feeling. So one of the interesting things is that sometimes if you look up, you want to know what's the Japanese Buddhist word for compassion, and they'll tell you jihi. These two characters, ji and hi, jihi. But actually, ji is kindness or maitri, and hi is compassion or karuna. So that this kindness and compassion kind of go together. In the other scheme, it suggests that kindness is the love of a mother for her child, and compassion is like the love of a mother for her sick child. And so I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but that compassion, the kanji for compassion, ji-hi, so the hi is the Chinese reading, but the Japanese reading is kanashi, which means sadness. And you're like, wow, why sad and compassion? But it's because when we see someone suffering, that sadness comes out, right? Like the love of a mother for her sick child, right? If we see someone suffer, and the compassion response would be sadness and wanting to help too. And so I thought, this kindness and compassion are kind of interesting answers to greed and anger. The anger makes sense, right? So instead of hating someone, be nice to them, right? Instead of hating them and hurting them, try and help. And so that's that kind of kindness and compassion response maybe to anger or hatred. On the greed side, you might be like, yeah, but what about greed? But one way I think that compassion manifests is dana, or selfless giving, right? And that this kind of core Buddhist value too of dana, of this selfless giving that is a manifestation of compassion. So rather than greed, I want that and I'm going to keep it for myself, right? No, wow, I have this, you need some, here, let's give it away, let's all share. And I think that is also a really kind of basic Buddhist value, is this sharing, right? In addition to this kindness and helping, of compassion, helping by sharing, right, by giving. And so, these are what to me are part of what I'd like to think about as Buddhist values. Now I just want to do a little caution. What about Jodo Shinshu? Right? And you might think, what about it? What's the big deal? But Shinran Shonin does address compassion in the Tannisho, or Record and Lament of Divergences. I'm using the Tannisho that's like in one volume from Shin Buddhism Translation Series, but you might have a different translation of it. If you have collected works of Shinran, we'll put the page numbers up on the screen or in the description on YouTube. And so Tannisho, we got to be careful with Tannisho. It's not, Nishihon Ganji doesn't really accept it as the bottom line of doctrine. You have to look to Kyogyo Shinsho for that. But Shinran talks about different stuff, or is reported as talking about different stuff in here than he talks in a different way than in Kyogyo Shinsho. Now remember, Tannisho, or Record and Lament of Divergences, is not written by Shinran. It's written by one of his followers, Yuiembo, who is remembering things that Shinran said during the first 10 chapters and writing them down towards the end of Yuien's life. So Shinran has already passed. And so it's remembering conversations that he had. You know how memory is, right? Maybe he doesn't remember them exactly. Maybe he misheard them in the first place. We don't know. But it's still a really fascinating document that can at least bring some of these issues out. So chapter 4, Shinran is talking about compassion, and this is where it's really important. So let me just read it. Concerning compassion, there's a difference between the path of sages and the path of the Pure Land. Compassion in the path of sages is to pity, commiserate with, and care for beings. It is extremely difficult, however, to accomplish the saving of others just as one wishes. Compassion in the Pure Land path should be understood as first attaining Buddhahood quickly through saying the Nembutsu, and, with the mind of great love and great compassion, freely benefiting sentient beings as one wishes. However much love and pity we may feel in our present lives, it is hard to save others as we wish. Hence, such compassion remains unfulfilled. Only the saying of the Nembutsu, then, is the mind of great compassion that is thoroughgoing. Thus were his words. So again, that thus were his words is Yuien saying, this is what I remember Shinran saying. So Shinran's splitting compassion into path of sages, which is the way that many kind of schools of Buddhism, I'm going to attain enlightenment, right? I'm going to do these practices. I'm going to purify my mind. I'm going to purify my actions. I'm going to do it. I'm going to become a monk. I'm going to become a bodhisattva and become Buddha myself. Shinran, coming from Dao Cho, one of the Chinese masters, calls that path of sages, as opposed to the Pure Land path, or the gate of the Pure Land. And that is the path of Nembutsu. That's a path of other power as opposed to self-power of the path of sages. And it's attaining Buddhahood through the power of the Buddha, not by my own power. And so this is getting to be kind of hardcore Jodo Shinshu, but that's good. That's what we are, so that's what we need to know. And so he recognizes that in the path of sages, compassion is I want to pity, commiserate with, and care for beings. But, Shinran notes, it is extremely difficult to accomplish the saving of others just as one wishes. Right? To really do this 100%, very, very difficult. And then compassion in the Pure Land path is understood first attaining Buddhahood quickly through saying the Nembutsu, and with the mind of great love and great compassion, freely benefiting sentient beings as one wishes. Now, another issue with Tannisho is it brings up the question, well, when does that happen? When does birth in the Pure Land happen? When does one attain Buddhahood? Is it in this life? Or does it happen at death? I come from the school, the school of thought that it happens at death. So that's how I'm understanding this. And so with that understanding, though, is any compassion possible in this life? Should I even bother trying to be compassionate? It's a really, really important question. And it's not an easy question to answer. I feel like there's a recognition of how limited my own personal abilities are. I'm limited in what I can do. I'm limited by my ego. I'm limited by the 3 poisons and the 108 defilements. Right? And so even when I try to help, what if I'm doing it for selfish reasons and not selfless reasons? And so I think that that's kind of a lot of what Shinran's talking about here. Remember, he was a monk for 20 years. Right? He tried to do Buddhist practices for a long, long time and studied so hard, and finally realized, I can't do this, and left the mountain. Right? So that's kind of where Shinran is coming from someone who really tried for a long time. It's not like he was like, that looks really hard, I'm not going to do it. Right? I think it came from someone who tried really hard as a monk at a place that's what you're supposed to be doing. And finally is like, no, I'm leaving. This isn't the path for me. But then he discovers another path where wisdom and compassion, rather than me trying to generate it, comes to me. Right? And I'm doing this because Amida Buddha's over there, right, in the Naiji. And so this wisdom and compassion coming to me. So I think part of Shinshu is realizing I'm not doing great compassion, right? I might have compassion. I might be able to do some things, but it's limited, and to recognize those limitations. But we have to know this ideal. We have to have an idea of these values of kindness and compassion. Right? If you don't know that, you have nothing to measure yourself against. Right? So how do I know if what I'm doing is right or wrong if I don't have an idea of what right and wrong are? Right and wrong are different to a lot of different people, a lot of different groups. Right? And so that's why I'm trying to explicate, to explain, to understand what is right and wrong in Buddhism. And to me, just putting it one way to think of it, greed and anger are wrong. Kindness and compassion are right. But Shinran's then saying, but we can't do right. It's really hard to do what's right. But I think we only know that by trying. We only know that I can't do right because I tried to do right and failed. Right? I can only know how hard it is to truly help someone else when I try and it doesn't go the way I planned. Right? And that's okay though. Right? That we're kind of striving to be like Buddha in a way, and yet part of the recognition is I'm never going to make it on my own. Right? That I need others, I need help. The great thing is that help is available. Right? That this wisdom and compassion is around us always. Right? So that I can try and live this life of kindness, trying to be kind, trying to be compassionate, but also reflecting. Right, that self-reflection is so important in Jodo Shinshu. And so knowing this ideal, wisdom and compassion, Buddhahood, Bodhisattva way, dana, selfless giving, trying and then realizing, whoa, wait a second, I can't be selfless. I'm constantly protecting what's mine, right? Constantly protecting myself or my family or my group or whatever, my ideas, my ego. Right? But measuring that against selflessness, right, and seeing, once again, right, I didn't make it up to that mark, but it's okay. Namo Amida Butsu. Buddha still embraces me, even though I fail at that. And so we live in the world of the three poisons, samsara, right? We see that all around us, especially now. And so try not to indulge in it, although often we do, right? But if we just allow ourselves to indulge in it, I can't do kindness and compassion, so forget it. I'm not going to do it. That's not the answer, right? That we always have that kindness and compassion in our mind, in our heart, realizing how much of it actually does come to me, and then realizing, greed and anger are not the way. That's not what life is about. And even if I succeed at that, what have I gained? I really think that this teaching, these values of kindness and compassion, the absence of greed, the absence of anger, is our ideal, our goal. And even if we can't achieve that goal in our life, we're lifted up to it by the Buddha. Right? We're brought to it at the end of our life. And so I think I've kind of run out of time, but let's keep thinking about these values. Maybe we can apply these values to what we see around us in the world, and what's going on. And I want to talk more about that at some point, even if I don't do it here in the BCO Dharma talk. I'm thinking of trying to talk about some difficult stuff, like racism is one of the big ones that we're facing right now. I have thoughts on that, and so I want to talk about that some more too, but not today. Today, let's just keep in mind that the three poisons are around us always, inside me always, but that's not the way to go. That's not the direction to head in. The direction to head in is wisdom and compassion, and whether it's me trying to gain it or realizing, whoa, wisdom and compassion, it's coming, it's pulling me. Right? It's embracing me, and to have those thoughts in our mind, right, of this kindness and compassion, and turning away from greed and anger when we find it in ourselves. Okay, so thank you very much. Take care, everyone. See you soon. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo.